I know a lot of it is repeat for folks who are sort of familiar with sex positivity movement and are familiar with the show. But a lot of this is stuff that, man, I so desperately wish somebody had shared with me early on in my journey. And a lot of it still, even after I've rejected it, I notice it popping up in my daily life in all these little ways without even realizing it. So moving fairly quickly, I want to point out the idea that we often believe, kind of as Julie was saying, that women either don't like sex or are less likely to enjoy it, are less likely to be interested in kinky or interesting sex, and just prefer to have sex less. I'll tell you, as a therapist, when couples come to me, there are so many women that are wanting more sex than they're getting from their male partners. Obviously, we know there's no biological explanation for all of this. So, just quick as you can, what are the ways that this shows up in daily life?
Carrie, your turn.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. All right. Get ready. Put your seatbelts on.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Strapped in.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, this one really gets me because it hits on, almost every one of the points that we've already talked about so far, when we're talking about, slut shaming and the idea of, biology determining things, but it's like fake biology. It's not real information. I mean, I cannot tell you how many relationships that I've been in that, the problem I'm putting in air quotes was, that I wanted sex more than my partner did. And the problem with that becomes not just that there's an incompatibility, but that, well, now there's something wrong with me. And if they're a male, there's something wrong with them too now, because now they're not being appropriately masculine. I'm not being appropriately feminine, which, I'm upfront about. I have never been and am not going to be. But nevertheless, people have expectations. And, it's completely nonsensical, to think that just because, okay, I'm going to drop another book recommendation here.
Please
Just
do.
because I feel like now that I've started a trend, I'm just going to have to keep going. There's this book that I really love by a biological anthropologist or physical anthropologist named Augustine Fuentes called Race, Monogamy, and Other Lies They Told You, which I highly recommend. And he basically goes into some of the biology of this and tries to kind of outline where, there is some biology in terms of, differences between people who are assigned male at birth and people who are assigned female at birth. And those differences go, about this far.
Right.
Then the social and cultural assumptions that we make about those differences goes about this far. And I'm,
For the
stretching my arms
podcast
as
audience,
I can.
Kara is indicating that it's a bunch of bullshit.
Yes.
She's caught a really big fish.
Yes, I have caught a really big fish, and I'm putting that picture on my Bumble profile because that's apparently what you're supposed to do.
Called out.
Yeah, no, I'm calling that out. It's okay if you really like to go fishing. I do, but it's this is the problem again when people start making these assumptions and stereotypes about biology where maybe they saw a study one time where they saw a statistically insignificant result that 4 of the men in this study felt like they had a higher libido than some of the women, and I'm sorry, but that does not describe everyone's experience. And even if you can find, perhaps a small, average difference, that doesn't account for the range of experiences that people have that do not fall into that stereotype. And this idea, is further problematic when people are trying to talk about their experiences with their partner, and now you're being cast into a role where, oh well, you're not supposed to like sex, so now it's kind of weird if you do, and it's threatening if you want it more than I do, and on top of that, what's wrong with you, and now we can't talk about what's actually happening, because instead we're going to be talking about the threats to our identity and our ego that are happening because you didn't fit into this made up stereotype that's not real. And so you end up just having this complete red herring, to continue on the fish theme, that doesn't allow you to actually express your actual interest or desires, and that's in my opinion completely unproductive.
Yeah, I like what you said, and I totally want to read that book. So if you could drop that in the notes,
Yeah, we'll
that
definitely
Yeah.
have all of these in the
yeah,
show notes for the episode. I don't expect
that
anybody
Yeah.
to catch them as we go, but yeah, please check it out. You can find that wherever you're finding this episode, as well as in the Secular Sexuality Facebook fan group. Nate, please, as quick as you can, where does this myth show up?
well, in my own personal experience, sorry to come after Kara's wonderful, brilliant response. With my experience, that I have never met a woman that didn't like sex, and I have dated women, and every man that I've ever heard reiterate this trope, I'm just like, no, man, women just don't want to have sex with you because you suck and you've got a really shitty attitude. So, the other thing that I think this sort of attitude can lead to that's actually legitimately dangerous is the incel movement. Is this whole attitude that I want to be with women, but women don't want to be with me, and nobody will ever love me, and then we get some seriously dangerous shit happening. So that is a much more serious approach to, or a much more serious result of this kind of bullshit.
Yeah, and I just want to also spare a thought for the perfectly healthy, wonderful man in a relationship with a woman who now feels like there's something wrong with him because he doesn't want to have sex twice as much as his wife does, and then feels like he is
Yeah.
letting her down. He's not enough of a man, and then that's going to lead to quote unquote performance issues, which then start to compound because the moment you start to feel like you are not performing, you're going to not perform harder, and that really doubles down on itself. This is just a little bit bonus, but let's remember that you're not there to perform, you're there to have a good time. And if you start looking at it as a performance, you're going to get performance anxiety, and you don't need to be doing anything in any particular level of quality. But that's a separate topic for a separate show. I've got two more here, but I suppose I'm going to go ahead and bundle them up since we've got a couple of calls and we're getting a little bit long. I would love to have y'all just kind of as generally as you can, and then some of the little hairs that fly off of this, address the idea that arousal equals desire and that desire is always spontaneous. There's a lot there to pick apart. Y'all jump in.
I'm just saying that occasionally somebody has to pull my ripcord before stuff happens. So yeah, I totally identify with that. Especially, in the case of mismatched libidos, you may have to spend some time getting your partner in the mood, and that's okay. Kara, what did you have to say?
Yeah, completely agree with that. And also, the other side of the coin there is that this can go down a really dark path really quickly if you're
Mhm.
having the opposite experience where you're not consenting to an experience and you don't want it to be happening, but your
Mm,
body is showing certain physiological responses, which can then be interpreted as, oh, well, you were obviously aroused, therefore you did want this to happen to you. And that's a part of rape culture. And if we're again, to tie it back to purity culture again, that's something that people are basically taught, that you have to be in control of your body at all times, and you are responsible for the responses that your body might produce in someone else. And there's very much this emphasis on you must control what your body does, and if it does something that's quote unquote wrong, you're
Mm.
sinning, and you have somehow participated in this act that maybe you didn't actually consent to have happen to you. And that can be really damaging for people who may have experienced some kind of sexual assault or non-consensual encounter, and then feel like that either their feelings about it are invalid, or that they are somehow guilty for having made that happen, or not resisted in the right way, or that deep down they really wanted it. And that's not true. It doesn't have to necessarily be the case that what you're thinking in your head and wanting and desiring and saying out of your mouth, or not even saying out of your mouth, has to match what your body is necessarily doing at that moment. So
Yeah,
PSA.
and this shows up in one of the strangest ways. I want to be really mindful in the way that I share this, but typically when clients come to me to work out an issue, there's no set number of sessions or anything else. Sometimes it'll be just 2 or 3 appointments. Sometimes it'll be perhaps even 2 or 3 years, depending on what we're working through. But on many, many different occasions, I have had clients come to me and I have shared with them the simple fact that just because you got an erection while viewing something doesn't actually mean that you want that thing. You may or may not want that thing, but the presence or lack of presence of an erection does not equate to whether or not you approve of the images that you saw on some shady website late at night. And oftentimes we won't even get past the consultation. There will be this sense of relief, like, oh, really? Like that's true? And I'll, point them towards all the right books. And that's kind of problem solved oftentimes, because we can become incredibly terrified of what our body is doing, quote, against our will. And that's just not anything that I would ask anybody to apologize for. Like an erection, as wanted or unwanted, as socially appropriate or inappropriate or not, is not under your control, and it's not an indication of what you enjoy. Sorry, I just
You're too
really
good
felt
for
like I
your
need
own
to jump
good,
in with that
Christy.
one.
No, yeah. You're just too good at your own job.
Yeah. Yeah, no, pricing myself out. What can I say? Well, there's so much more that I wanted to get into here. We definitely bit off quite a lot tonight, but I think it was important to jump back to the phones. We're going to have a little bit more time to wrap up at the end, but I know I threw a lot rapid fire at y'all. So before Nate does jump back to the phones, is there anything else that you wanted to mention here?
Kara?
No, I don't have any more book recommendations right off the top of my head,
Sure.
but let me think about it for a minute and I'll get back to you with some.
Yeah.